International stories now. The newly appointed head of NATO and U.S. Forces General McChrystal has announced he wants to revise their strategy in Afghanistan. To talk more about the outline of this new strategy, we now cross live to our Washington correspondent Priya Sridhar and her guest Tony Blankley, a contributor to the Washington Times. Now over to you, Priya.
Thanks. Well, the commander of the United States and NATO forces in Afghanistan, General Stanley McChrystal, has said that they need to rethink their strategy in that country in order to defeat the Taliban. Now, many say that his new review will likely lead to more troops getting deployed to that region. McChrystal is expected to brief President Obama on his findings later this year. But in the meantime, many wonder what more can be done in this country that's been engaged in war with the United States for the past 8 years. Well, joining me to discuss this is Tony Blankley, contributor to the Washington Times. Tony, thanks so much for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
First of all, can you tell me, what do you think McChrystal meant by the fact that we need to re-strategize? What needs to be done in Afghanistan?
Well, my sense, and it's a private report at this point that he sent, but the rumors coming out, is that we're going to have major increase in strength for at least 2 or 3 years to bridge the period during which to build up the Afghan army and national police and perhaps tribal forces, because they're not going to be able to get anywhere near where they need to be, if it's possible, in shorter periods. So he's probably going to be asking for 20, 30, 40,000 more American troops. And then they're going to be trying to take and protect villages from the Taliban, and that's going to require a lot of troops because it's a big country and a lot of villages.
And, you know, many American officials have been talking very openly about what has gone wrong in Afghanistan. What are some of those things that have gone wrong, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's very hard to dominate a land like that. I've been up there, not recently, but it's a very rough country. There were no borders. There's been the Pakistan refuge where the Taliban could go back in, and the Pakistani government has been intermittent in trying to put pressure on them. You've got a lot of villages who are going to go with whatever the force of the moment is, rather than with the central government. There's never been a strong central government. You've got a government that's got more and more corrupt as the years that they've been in power. They have a small military force. We have a handful of troops, and with the exceptions of the British, the rest of the NATO forces are too cowardly to fight. So they're all off in safe areas, and the Brits and the Americans are doing the heavy fighting and the dying, and with insufficient numbers. So, I mean, in a nutshell, that's the problem.
You know, there's been increasing disapproval for the war in Afghanistan by many people in the United States. Do you think that's likely to play a role in President Obama's decision to send more troops over there?
I think I don't know what's going to make the point in how many troops he sends, but yes, I think we're right at a very fluid moment now in Washington politics. It's an unnatural situation. Normally, the Democratic Party does not support wars in recent decades as much as the Republicans do. You've got a Democratic president who has said he's committed to fighting and succeeding in Afghanistan. His natural base, the Democrats, tend to be anti-war. The Republicans, who tend to be more supportive of military actions, well, he's the president of another party. And so the politics are sort of upside down for political support. You've had this morning George Will, who is probably the preeminent conservative columnist in the country, come out saying we need to get out of Afghanistan. Now, to be said, he was never much of a war hawk on Iraq. He was one of the early ones to say we ought to get out of Iraq, too. Nonetheless, that's a big deal for him to be saying that. The liberals and the anti-war faction are holding their fire because they've got a liberal president and they don't want to undercut him, but there's a lot of grumbling that's going to build, so it's a very difficult political moment.
Thanks. Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see how McChrystal's findings actually affect the strategy over in Afghanistan. But for now, back to you in Moscow.
Well, thank you very much, Priya.